This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'm going to be doing a little first round update on the 2012 London Chess Classic. This has got to be one of the strongest tournaments in the history of chess. Very interesting tournament format. It's the Sophia rules, which means you get 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, and 0 points for losing. So it really motivates the top players to really put it all on the line, and that's exactly what we saw in the first round. Magnus Carlsen had a very strong positional win over British Super Grandmaster Luke McShane. That was not the best display by the British GM, but Carlsen has that effect on people of grinding out their souls. Judit Polgar had a fascinating piece sacrifice for 2 pawns against former world champion Vladimir Kramnik. Unfortunately, Kramnik is just too good, and he managed to overcome the best female chess player of all time. Adams, he ground out Gawain Jones. Adams does that as well. That's why he's 2,700 plus. And now we're going to come to the featured event. Levon Aronian, number 2 in the world at 28.15 FIDE, chasing Magnus Carlsen. And I guess somewhere around number 10 or 15, Hikaru Nakamura at 27.60 FIDE. So just to give you a little background, last year Nakamura had a great tournament at the 2011 London Classic. He feels very comfortable playing in London. I've heard that quite a few times in interviews. And he finished second last year behind Kramnik, just ahead of Magnus Carlsen and the rest of a very tough field, Anand, etc. And so coming into this event, the psychology is pretty interesting because Nakamura, I believe this was in late September, so about 5 or 6 weeks ago, was playing in London, at the Grand Prix in London, and had one of the worst tournaments of his life. I think he had 4 points out of 11. He got last place, and he lost 23 FIDE points. He dropped from 2783 to 2760. So this was a little bit interesting. I think Nakamura put a few tournaments after that, did pretty well. And so really a lot of pressure on him at the London Classic here, and will continue to be as he goes through the Grand Prix cycle. So kicking things off, Aronian starts out with c4. Aronian plays d4 as well a lot, not so much e4, occasionally knight f3 as well, so it kind of mixes it up. And so c5 by Nakamura, knight f3, this is, Aronian plays this a lot, and knight c6. Okay, so d4. Right, so up to this point, white has a lot of different options. Play g3, go with the quick fianchetto, e3, it's kind of flexible, maybe preparing d4, and also I can play knight c3. And so the choice d4 is definitely sharper. That's okay. Aronian's number 2 in the world. I'm sure he's familiar with the theory. And after knight f6, this seems to be kind of I don't know, a lot of people don't really seem to know about this line or really play it so much these days. But I don't know, it's a very interesting line with knight f6. The idea is that, okay, white still has the same kind of moves. He can play g3, e3, knight c3, that's the main stuff, right? And the line he chooses in the game with g3, this fianchetto line, now things can become quite interesting with the line that Nakamura employs with e5. And this is extremely sharp. It's very similar to a lot of Sicilian defenses. Nakamura has a lot of experience in the Sicilian. And, okay, e5. I mean, let's talk about candidate moves, right? I mean, knight f3 doesn't really make any sense. It seems like it just sets up e4, or the knight on f3. It just doesn't really make sense to me why you would put the knight there. Let's just say we could play e4, bishop check, and e3. Just something like this, a sample line, right? So knight f3, that seems like a wasted move. The knight on b3, this is a very strange place to put the knight. It's not really clear what it's doing or how it's going to get back in the game. And the knight on c2 is relatively out of play as well. I guess it could come to e3, but it's going to take a lot of time. So we see Aronian employ the most aggressive move, all things considered, knight to b5. I do want to address real quick, knight f5, it's just going to be loose. It's going to be a loose goose knight there. I mean, that's not a good place. So, okay, back to the game. Knight to b5, and we can see that white is slightly behind in development. He's moved this knight quite a few times, made a couple of pawn moves here, and but it's not that clear how black is going to be able to exploit that. Black cannot play d5, the most natural looking move, as after, let's say, knight takes, white is just going to win a piece with this nice tactic, and he's going to come out on top. So okay, so the natural move d5, just not going to cut it. That's kind of one of the ideas with this knight to b5 move. d6, it's going to look like some lines in the Sicilian defense, the Sveshnikov. However, there's a big difference. White doesn't have a pawn on e4, right? And his bishop is just going to chill on this diagonal. And with such control of this diagonal in the d5 square, you got to think that white has got a very solid positional advantage long term. So d6 kind of stinks. I mean, it's not really what you're looking for. And so here's the line. This bishop b4 check seems to have overwhelming results for black. So if you're struggling against the English opening with this c4 and g3 and this kind of stuff, I mean, maybe do a little bit of research into this line after checking out this game, because it really seems like white he kind of gets mixed up as long as black is familiar with the tactical resources to avoid getting that kind of positionally busted position we looked at. So let's see. So the bishop check. What does this do? I suppose if knight to c3, this is certainly an option. Knight to e4 would be a possible counter. I would definitely think so. You could also castle. I think black's going to be doing just fine. The knights aren't really communicating. They're really kind of fighting for the same square, and that's going to be a recurring theme in this game. So after bishop b4, if this knight goes back, I mean, this is like, what just happened? The knight has moved like 15 times in only 7 moves. And it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, look at the development. Black's just killing it. Just going to play d5 and have an awesome game. So the other move, talking about candidate moves, and the knights can move, and it's not terribly impressive. Bishop to d2 seems to be, a pretty logical move. I mean, okay, we want to get the knight on d6, right? That's why it's on b5. And so if we can trade off the dark squared bishops, we're going to have a better chance of doing that. And here's the kicker, a6, kicking the knight. And, let's talk about candidate moves. We would look at checks, captures, and forcing moves. Well, like a big capture here would be bishop takes. And here I think black's just going to take the knight. And, at first, I had to look at this first when I was looking at the game. Bishop d6, got to be the move that comes to mind. Now I started looking at things like queen a5 check immediately. It looks pretty promising. Let's say queen d2, just knight e4. And here we're starting to see that black's edge in development is really starting to show that white had made so many pawn moves, just maybe like one extra pawn move, but he made a lot of moves with that same knight while black was developing different pieces. And this type of variation really does a good job of kind of demonstrating that. And black's lead in development, is going to lead to some good tactics. Same stuff is going to go down after maybe knight to c3. We still have the idea of knight to e4, and now we have the idea of b4. It's not really about trying to win this pawn here, because this pawn would be so weak, white's probably going to win it back anyway. Maybe not, with the queen on a5, it's not about winning the pawn. I mean, it's just kind of about attacking white, I think, as much as possible. Bishop on d6 is exposed. So going back, what Aronian played in the game, he didn't take the bishop, he decided to move his knight. And, okay, the other candidate moves other than taking the bishop would have to be knight to a3 or knight to c3. I don't see any other way of counterattacking here for white. The knight on a3 is going to be really far out of the game. Let's not forget how many moves this knight has made. And even after a simple move like bishop c5, right, there's no need to trade pieces. The bishop is going to be so well placed here. Bishop g5, for example, I mean, maybe even just knight e4. Okay, so let's go back to the game. The idea with knight e4 is that if he takes the queen, he's going to get checkmated. So, back to the game. He brings the knight back to c3, and now we can see this principle of redundant knights. The knights are really fighting for the same squares. Right? He'd like to get a knight to d5, and then his other knight could come in. That would be great, except that Nakamura plays d5 himself here. They're definitely the most forcing moves. Right? There's no need to play automatic developing moves like castling here. that would really just defeat the whole purpose. Then white could just develop. He's got an iron grip on d5, and white's going to have a very nice game. By playing d5 himself, black is playing a very nice opening. And we can see he's really pushing on Aronian. And this time, Aronian had taken a good deal of time, 30 minutes for 8 moves. It's about standard. Nakamura had taken about 5 minutes. So I believe, Nakamura's a fast player. And he does use the clock as part of the game. But this has got to be preparation. I think he saw something in Aronian's game. And he prepared this, and he caught him off balance. He found a chink in the armor. So with d5, basically, it's pretty simple. I mean, if he takes this, the queen is going to be just a freak. It's going to be the centralized queen just hitting the rook here. I mean, just forcing f3, this is enough for me to say that black has an awesome game here. Right? Just forcing f3, I mean, that's enough. Very, very good position. So, okay, so if white can't take this all the way, he does take it, he doesn't want to allow d4, maybe black could steal a pawn and back it up. He does take the pawn. We see knight takes, and he plays bishop to g2. And so evaluating this position is starting to become difficult. Right here, black plays a normal move. We see a normal developing move, castles. And again, let's just say that black castles here. I think the move, knight takes d5, followed by just knight to c3 maybe. And we would probably see a draw. I would say that black has a slight edge here, just a slight edge with the pawn on e5, but it's very small. This is probably a draw. But Nakamura plays a very nice move, and this is another great example of why automatic development is not good. It's much better to try to create targeted threats from the very first move. So after Aronian castles, right, I mean, white, this is why it's kind of weird to analyze this position. It's a strange position. This whole opening is kind of weird. White's biggest weakness, white has two big weaknesses in this position, right? I mean, we know that black has got a very comfortable game, but how is he going to continue trying to attack white? Well, we have to identify the weaknesses. Obviously, the knight on b1, this is an incredibly weak piece. How are we even going to get that in the game? And without that knight moving, how are we going to move the rook? Okay, enough said. The other big weakness in white's position is the bishop on d2. And so this is not quite as obvious, but when you really start, paying attention, the move Nakamura plays in the game, knight to b6, is just killer. Because now the knight's not going to be able to exchange. And the bishop on d2, where does it go? Right? I mean, I literally had to look at this game, maybe 3 or 4 times just to figure out what was going on. And then I it was kind of like a light bulb, the bishop on d2. That's the whole thing. And the bishop has no squares. Right, so he tries to play bishop to e3, and this seems like a good idea, but it's actually very bad. So maybe here, I'm just going to throw something crazy out there. I hadn't looked at this before preparing, but f4, I don't know, just try to get this bishop into the game. f4 is probably not a good move. It's very committal, very weakening, but just, bishop to e3, we'll see what happens. Plays knight to c4 instantly. So Nakamura is just killing it. And look at the times. Aronian is #2 player in the world. And he's got an hour here. Nakamura with an hour 45 minutes. Nakamura's used 15 minutes for the first 12 moves. And very complicated. We can see the move knight to c4. This is a bad sign for Aronian. Already into time trouble and a difficult position. But the guy's a fighter. So he plays queen to c1. This is a very logical move. I mean, the knight on c4 is definitely doing some work attacking these squares. Queen to c1, just simply defending both the squares. Not a good sign, right? Defending, not counterattacking. Okay, so Nakamura decides to castle. Maybe instead of castling here, he could have also played rook to c8. But this would be a very natural move, I think, trying to just hit the x-ray on the queen, but I can't say anything bad about castling. Maybe rook c8 was just a little bit less flexible. So he's got to castle, need to get the other rook in the game. So here we see rook to d1. This can't be a bad move. And queen to c7. This is kind of an interesting square for the queen. And in this position, you know, it seems like, okay, well, black has certainly got a very nice pressure in the position, but it's not exactly clear yet what he's threatening. He's got a very strong knight, excellent coordination, piece play, all that stuff is great. White's knight is still out of the game, but, you know, it seems like Aronian has played this pretty chill. He's played it close to the chest. He hasn't created any big weaknesses. Hasn't been impatient. You know, he's just trying to chill and get out of the opening. And this is actually a very critical position. And this is where, in a couple of moves, we're going to see Aronian, just the position just continues to get worse. I think here he might have wanted to seriously consider playing a move like bishop to d5. If we talk about our candidate moves, just going back, in this position, the knight on b1, right? We love to play knight to d5, followed by knight to c3, and white would, you know, probably be quite relieved to make it out. The problem with knight to d5 is that, okay, this is the most forcing move. We have to consider this first. Is that okay? First, the knight is being attacked on c4, so it doesn't seem like, you know, with the queen being attacked, black doesn't really have a choice. He has to take it. Let's start with bishop takes. This is probably a little more natural. And I think after knight takes e3. Now knight to d4. And I think in this position, I don't see a clear win. I don't see anything directly forcing. But it just black just has a serious amount of pressure. This bishop's cut off, so it's going to be easy to develop and kick it out. And the knight just hitting c2, and the rook could be trapped. I mean, it's just crazy. Rook c1 is not even possible. We would just take it and win it, right? So, you know, it's, again, I don't see a perfectly clear win, but I see a lot of very dangerous ideas. And it's very difficult even to just make a move for white in this position. Meanwhile, black's plan is going to play rook d8. He's going to play bishop c5 and probably f5 and f4. And we're going to see a focal point established on f2. So going back to the game. With that in mind, I think white would really be benefited. It would behoove him to play bishop d5, to exchange some pieces, to try to break. Just exchanging pieces can help minimize the pressure. And, well, okay, maybe Nakamura would still play knight to d4, knight a5. I don't think these moves are that dangerous. And I feel like maybe this was, I mean, there's still this move, and knight to d4. But this is a lot less clear. There's some exchange sacrifices in here, like bishop takes e6. And I feel like white has got sufficient resources here. The move in the game, he played a3. And Nakamura played very well here. Simply knight takes e3. And bishop a5. And so he just... Okay, he's got the two bishops. He's going to point this bishop right at his king. White with knight to d2. Pretty similar position, again, with the knight to d5 stuff. This almost... It's almost exactly what we just looked at with knight to d4 here. It's probably even better. Who knows? I mean, it's about the same for black. It's very good. So... in this position, he tries knight to d2, Aronian. He's got a half hour, Nakamura, 75 minutes. They're only at move 17. I think they hit the time control at move 40. So Aronian's got 30 minutes, 28 minutes to make 23 moves. It's not a lot of time. In a very difficult position still. You know, it's kind of sneaky. It seems like white is doing just fine. But if you look under the surface, you can see that it's very difficult for white to make threats. And meanwhile, black is the one making all of the forcing moves and really just carrying out a plan. So now we see, after bishop to b6, that Aronian plays kind of a weird move, but it's got a concrete point. He's trying to stop knight d4 with this pressure against the b7 pawn. So if knight to d4, he's going to snatch a pawn. So, okay, so queen f3. And, you know, he'd love to play knight d5, love to play moves like rook c1, but it's not that easy. Nakamura just plays rook to d8. he stops the move knight to d5 and develops a piece. And he also gets the rook off his diagonal. If there's complications, white ends up taking b7. The rook isn't going to be hit on a8, right here. And so white in the game, he tries knight a4. I mean, this is a really tough position. If he plays, first of all, e4 is a horrible move. You're giving up really important squares. It's just not a good move to allow knight d4 so easily. If knight to e4 is a natural move, got some threats, but knight to d4 again. And now we can't even take the b7 pawn. So it's a very complicated position. Even though it looks even. If you count the pieces, everything is developed and whatnot, it looks even. But if you look deeper, what's white's plan? So he starts with knight to a4. Nakamura goes back. He wants to preserve this bishop. This bishop is a beast. Why would you trade it off for some scrubbly knight on the side of the board? And, okay, see queen to c3. Rook to c1 is also possible, but now we're going to start seeing another tactical element in black's favor coming into the game after rook to d4. Very similar to the game. If knight to c5, right? So the thing about rook to d4, we hit the weak knight. Loose pieces should be exploited. We hit the weak knight, and we also get ready to double on the d file and put massive pressure, which is probably going to win a piece. Knight to c5. And it doesn't have to be fancy to be good. Just this pressure on the d file, and that's it. That's just a knockout. There's just no way to just defend this knight. There's too much pressure. And I just... Bishop f5, bishop b3. There's just too much stuff going on. So in the game, he played queen to c3. And I think he's just trying to get the queen over to help out. He's got a lot of loose squares. The knight's loose. The rook could be loose. That pressure on the d file. So queen to c3 with the idea of playing the queen to c2 where we'll defend both these weaknesses. But it's really slow, and we see Nakamura just kills it here. He plays rook to d4. And now it's the same thing. I mean, if knight to c5, which maybe Aronian was planning, he doesn't have much time here, 17 minutes. Nakamura has almost an hour more than that. Knight c5, we just take it. And you can see just white's lack of coordination, lack of development. He's off balance. And just such a basic idea, but just very effective, just piling up on pinned pieces. So after rook to d4, white is starting to get pretty critical, the situation. Now black is really mobilizing all of his pieces. He tries queen to c2, defending both these loose guys. And now f5. Nakamura took, this was probably his first real big think of the game. I think he took about a little over a half hour here on f5. It's really not clear. I mean, I'm sure he was looking for knockout shots. I'm sure he was looking for ideas of pressuring on the c-file. I'm sure he was looking at b5, although the knight, b5 is not going to work. So it's kind of like, how else is he going to go after this knight? And, okay, he decides on f5. I mean, this seems to be the most direct and logical move to me. And now black has got a variety of threats. But this pressure, this focal point on f2, Aronian tries to shut it down with e3. So we see rook back to d8. Goes all the way back, and now he's either threatening f4 to blast open this the bishop and the rook, or he's also threatening e4, which is more of a positional idea, so less of a direct attack, more positional, shutting the bishop out and creating a very strong square on d3 and f3. White tries b4. Why not? He's trying to play knight c5. And now we see e4 by Nakamura. And again, he took about 20 minutes here. Right? It's a very complicated position. E4, I'm sure he was looking at f4. Right? I mean, that's the move to consider in this position. Also, I guess rook f6 is fairly interesting, trying to just change the direction of the attack to the f-file, but I just don't think it's quite enough. H5, trying to play h4 and soften it up is interesting, but white is actually on the verge of equalizing with knight to c5, rook c1, stuff like that. So e4 just tries to maintain the tension and improve his position. and not, it does do a lot of work. I mean, now the bishop is locked out. And so we see knight to b3, so it looks like white is almost back in the game. Queen f7. Aronian is very low on time. 7 minutes to make 16 moves. Very difficult. Black has an undeniable positional advantage, just bringing his knight to e5. So here white tries knight b c5. I think much better would have been knight a to c5. Because with knight a to c5, it just makes a little more sense to me, even if, let's say, here black's going to play bishop c4, trying to weasel the bishop in. Even if white needs to play knight to d4 here, possibly it's a very interesting position. I mean, you can at least say that white he's got activity with his pieces. Positionally speaking, black is quite a bit better after some of that knight to e5, but white at least has activity. Even if it's not directly threatening something, it's at least active. Maybe you can play f4, blast the position open. He's got to get play. But instead, after this move, knight b c5, it's just a weird move. I mean, the knight on a4 just is completely out of it. A knight on the rim is dim, right? That's what they say, and I mean, it's pretty clear here. So here we see bishop to d5. Rook d2 is a big mistake. It's already a very difficult position for white. I mean, even if he goes knight to c3, now we can see that bishop to c4, and it's just a weird position for white. His knights don't really have any play. The knight is coming to e5 very soon, and black's got everything good in this position. But after rook to d2, the knight on a4 is just too loose, and b6 exploits it to the fullest, and black is going to be winning a piece here. Or the exchange, as in the game. Aronian sacrificed the exchange. The thing is, there's just nowhere to go with the knight. There's just nowhere to go. If knight takes a6, I think this was the tactical oversight that Aronian had. Bishop to b3. And now, okay, the queen is attacking c6, but it can't take it. It looks like it's all good, but it's not all good. He's going to lose the exchange here as well. Maybe something like this. Let's say bishop takes a4. This could be a little bit better. It's still very complicated, but it looks like black is coming out quite on top. Still a very interesting tactic. And here, not a move like this, which would allow b5. But it seems like bishop b5. Anyway, I don't want to get carried away. Just the tactics. After b6, I mean, that's a little example. After b6, it looks like white is going to be losing a piece. He might have some crazy way out of it, but I don't think so. It looks like he's really losing a piece. So he sacks the exchange. Not much time on his clock, and he takes a6. So he's got a pawn for the exchange. And, black's bishop is completely shut out of the game. He's got this weak pawn here. So white does definitely have some compensation, but Nakamura just plays too good. So knight e5 is a very, very easy move, right? Just get it out of the way of the queen. And now it's got quite a bit of influence on the center. Tries rook to d1. It finally gets the rook in the game on move 29. So we rook d8. Captures. Queen takes. Why not? And in this position, it's very difficult. White tries knight to b2. This is just a really bad move to make, but he's trying to defend and avoid trading. And if bishop here, maybe this knight move doesn't look very comfortable either. So he tries knight b2 to defend. And after queen to d2, Nakamura with a straightforward technique. It's really not that easy of a game to win. I think if Aronian had more time, maybe he could try to put up more resistance. But if he can just swing the bishop in, get it back in the game. But I don't know. Black still has a pretty nasty attack. Black should probably still win. He plays queen to c7 here. Looks like a dominating move, but he loses to knight to g4. Aronian was about to flag as well. And well, okay, the game was very interesting. I mean, we saw Aronian definitely got surprised in the opening. He kept fighting. I mean, it's not like he really made any horrible moves in the game. Rook d2 was pretty bad. But rook d2, I guess if you had to pinpoint a critical mistake, this would probably get a question mark. But other than this, it was a very interesting game, and we could see the opening chosen by Nakamura is definitely very effective against this English opening, how Black was able to very dynamically open the position, and he just kept pushing from the very opening, the very first move. So this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.